Welcome to the Night Files. Tonight, ride into the dark with a truck driver's tale that'll haunt your highways. Plug in your earphones, close your eyes, and imagine. If this gave you chills, like, subscribe, and support us on Patreon for more horror that hits harder than headlights in the fog. Jason Burke had been a truck driver for nearly 20 years, hauling freight up and down the loneliest highways of South America. Dirt roads, endless deserts, forgotten villages. He thought he had seen it all, but nothing prepared him for the night. He accepted a job through the winding mountain roads of Bolivia. The client was strange. No names, no paperwork, just an envelope stuffed with cash and a cargo sealed in the back of his truck. The only instruction was clear: do not open the container under any circumstances. Jason needed the money. His instincts screamed at him to walk away, but desperation was louder. The drive started normally enough. His headlights cut through the thick fog curling along the isolated mountain path. The road twisted and turned, each corner more treacherous than the last, with sheer cliffs on one side and dense jungle on the other. His radio crackled with static, refusing to pick up any signals. Hours passed. The darkness thickened. Jason felt like he was driving into another world, far from anything human. Then came the first knock. It was faint, barely audible over the rumble of the engine. Jason glanced in the rearview mirror instinctively, even though he couldn't see the sealed container through the solid metal doors. He told himself it was nothing, just cargo shifting. Another knock, louder this time. Jason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He checked the clock. It was almost midnight. He tried to shake off the unease crawling up his spine. A whisper, barely audible, floated through the cab. "Let us out." Jason jerked upright, slamming the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on the gravel road before coming to a stop. His heart pounded in his chest. He looked around, but there was no one. Nothing but endless jungle and thick, suffocating mist. He tried to convince himself he was tired, hallucinating. But when he put the truck back in gear and started moving again, the whispering returned. "Please, help us." Jason turned up the volume on the dead radio, hoping to drown it out. But the voices only grew louder. He passed a road sign, nearly hidden by overgrowth. It was battered and rusted, but he caught a glimpse of it in the headlights. Puente de los Perdidos, 5 kilometers. Bridge of the Lost. Jason swallowed hard. He had heard stories from other truckers about Puente de los Perdidos. A cursed bridge, they said. A place where travelers vanished without a trace. He had laughed off the stories as campfire legends. Until now, the truck's temperature gauge spiked suddenly. Jason cursed under his breath, pulling over. Steam billowed from under the hood. He hopped out, flashlight in hand, and popped the hood. The engine looked fine. Nothing was leaking. Nothing was broken. But when he turned around to get back inside the cab, the driver's door was wide open. He knew he had closed it. Jason froze. The jungle around him was deathly silent. No insects, no animals, nothing. Just the oppressive fog creeping closer. Suddenly, a hand, small, pale, and wrong, gripped the edge of the truck door from the inside. Jason stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. The beam flickered across the ground, catching only glimpses, thin legs stepping out of the truck cab, dragging behind them the sound of nails scraping metal. More hands followed, dozens of them, as if something inside the container had broken free. Jason backed toward the jungle, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The figures emerged fully from the truck. They were children, or what used to be children. Their skin was gray and sickly, their eyes hollow black pits. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Jason turned and ran into the jungle, the dense undergrowth tearing at his clothes. He didn't dare look back. The sound of tiny feet slapping the ground behind him was growing louder. He ran until he couldn't breathe, until his legs gave out, and he collapsed against the base of a massive tree. The whispers surrounded him now, so loud he wanted to tear his own ears off. "You took us. You never let us out. Now you belong to the road." Through the gaps in the trees, Jason saw his truck, still idling, its headlights shining blankly into the mist. And he saw something else. Standing atop the cargo container was a woman in a tattered red dress. Her hair floated around her head like smoke. Her eyes were two burning coals, searing straight through him. She pointed at him, and then she smiled. Jason scrambled to his feet, lungs burning, and bolted deeper into the jungle. The branches slashed at his arms and face, but he barely felt them. All he could hear were the whispers, louder now, chanting in a language he didn't understand. He ran blindly through the trees, the ground slick with mud. Every step felt heavier, like something was pulling him down. In the dim light, he could see shapes moving among the trees, small figures, darting just beyond his vision. The woman in the red dress appeared again, suddenly ahead of him, her arms outstretched as if to welcome him. Her mouth twisted into a grin far too wide for her face. Jason veered off the path, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stumbled into a clearing and nearly gagged at the sight. Broken trucks, rusted carcasses of vehicles scattered around like a graveyard. Some still had their headlights flickering weakly. The air stank of burned rubber and decay. And there, sitting atop a ruined truck cab, was a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was stretched thin over bone, his eyes hollow. He smiled at Jason with broken teeth.
"Welcome."
The man rasped without moving his lips. Jason stumbled back, but before he could run, cold hands grabbed his arms and legs. The children had caught up to him. Their touch was ice against his skin, their fingers digging into his flesh. He screamed and fought, but they held him fast. The woman in red drifted closer, her feet not touching the ground. She cupped Jason's face in her hands, tilting his head up to meet her burning gaze.
"You broke the rule."
She whispered, her voice a hot breath against his skin. Jason struggled, but he was paralyzed by the weight of her stare. His mind filled with visions, screaming children locked in the dark. The container sealed tight, the air growing thin as they pounded and begged for help. He saw himself, years ago, working for a corrupt company that trafficked human cargo, smuggling desperate souls across borders. He had told himself it was just freight, just another job, not his problem. But the dead never forget. The woman pressed a single finger to Jason's forehead, and an unbearable heat surged through his skull. He screamed again, but no sound came out. The children began to chant, a mournful, broken song that made the trees around them sway. Jason's vision blurred. The jungle twisted and warped, until it became the dark metal interior of the container. He was inside now, trapped. The walls closed in, the air grew thinner. No escape. He pounded on the metal, just like they had. Outside, he could still see his truck, still idling on the road, waiting for its driver to return. But Jason wasn't coming back. The metal walls pressed closer around Jason as he clawed at the container, gasping for air that was no longer there. His nails bent and broke against the steel. The whispers filled the tiny space, growing louder, tearing into his mind. "Stay with us. You took our breath. Now you will give yours." Jason's body gave out, collapsing onto the cold, rusted floor. His vision dimmed, and in the final moments before darkness took him, he saw their faces pressing against the metal, dozens of them. Their empty eyes watching, waiting. Then, nothing. When the sun rose over the Bolivian mountains, a local farmer discovered Jason's truck abandoned by the roadside. The engine had long since died, and thick vines were already creeping over the wheels. The container was still sealed tight. Authorities eventually arrived. They forced open the heavy locks, expecting drugs or weapons. What they found was worse. Inside, there was no cargo, no bodies, just the faint outlines of handprints, covering every inch of the walls from the inside, and carved deep into the metal, as if by desperate fingernails, was a single message: "Stay on the road." Truckers whisper about Jason Burke to this day, about the man who broke the rules, who left the highway for the jungle, who listened when he should have kept driving. And sometimes, if you find yourself driving through the misty mountains of Bolivia, you might hear a knocking from your cargo hold, a soft, desperate tapping. They say if you stop, if you open your doors, you'll see him, Jason, standing there among the lost souls, his hollow eyes begging you to take his place. And you'll have no choice, because once you hear the knock, it's already too late. The sun was beginning to set as Ethan and his crew made their way down the long, winding road that led to Hollow Creek. The forest stretched endlessly around them, the trees growing thicker and taller as they moved deeper into the woods. They had been hired to clear a patch of land for a new development project, but the locals had warned them to be cautious about working in that area. "Ethan, man, you sure about this?" Mike, one of the workers, asked as he drove the truck. "People around here say this place is cursed." Ethan chuckled. He didn't believe in superstitions. It's just an old town legend. People like to scare each other with stories, nothing more. But as the road turned to gravel, and the trees closed in on both sides, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. The road ahead was narrow, barely wide enough for their truck to pass through. When they finally arrived at the site, the light was dimming quickly. The forest was silent, as if holding its breath. The crew unloaded their tools and began setting up camp near the edge of the creek. Ethan set up his tent while Mike and the others worked to secure the perimeter. The wind had picked up and the trees swayed, casting long shadows across the clearing. By the time everything was set up, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only the pale light of the moon to guide them. Ethan went over to the campfire where Mike was sitting, a nervous look on his face. "You sure about this place?" Mike asked again, his voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a story, Mike. We've got work to do." As the night went on, the rest of the crew gathered around the fire, talking about anything and everything to pass the time. But the air felt different now, tense, as if they were being watched. It was just after midnight when it started. At first, it was faint, a barely audible sound, like the wind passing through the trees. But as the minutes ticked by, the voices grew louder. Soft at first, but soon unmistakable. Low, guttural murmurs that seemed to echo from the trees surrounding the camp. It felt like they were coming from all directions. Mike was the first to speak up. "Do you guys hear that?" The others froze, listening intently. The wind had died down, and now the whispers were the only sound in the woods. "I don't like this," Mike muttered, his face pale. He looked around, as if expecting something to jump out from the darkness. Ethan stood up, his jaw tightening. "It's probably just the wind, Mike. Nothing to worry about." But even he wasn't convinced. There was something wrong. The whispers felt too deliberate, too human. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the darkness. Not the crunching of leaves or the rustle of branches. These were deliberate, heavy footsteps. Someone, or something, was walking toward them. The crew scrambled to their feet, looking around nervously. Ethan strained his eyes, but all he could see was the darkness between the trees. "Who's out there?" Ethan called out, his voice shaking despite his attempt to sound confident. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Then, a figure appeared from the darkness. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. Tall, gaunt, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent in the moonlight. His eyes were dark, sunken into his skull, and his clothes were ragged, hanging loosely from his thin frame. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at them with an unsettling gaze. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice now a little weaker than he intended. The figure tilted its head, its eyes never leaving Ethan's. Then, slowly, it raised a bony hand, pointing toward the creek. The silence that followed was deafening. The air around the campfire grew colder. The figure in the shadows didn't move. It just stood there, its bony hand still pointing toward the creek. Ethan's crew stared at the man, not sure whether to run or approach. Mike was the first to break the silence, his voice trembling. "Ethan, we should get out of here." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't one to run from anyone, but there was something wrong about this situation. He could feel it deep in his gut. "Who are you?" Ethan asked again, his voice firmer this time. The figure's lips didn't move, but a voice echoed in Ethan's mind. "Go to the creek, before it's too late." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He shook his head, trying to clear the haze in his mind. The voice wasn't coming from the man, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper in the woods. "Did you hear that?" Mike whispered, his face drained of color. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were still fixed on the figure, but he was already moving. His instincts told him to follow the figure's silent command. But another part of him screamed to run far, far away. He wasn't sure why, but he had to go. "I'll go check it out," Ethan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Ethan, no," Mike pleaded. "Don't go near the creek." But Ethan ignored him. He took one slow step forward, then another, moving toward the figure who remained perfectly still. The coldness in the air intensified the closer he got to the creek. The trees seemed to close in tighter, as if the forest was pressing in on him. The figure didn't follow him, didn't move an inch. But Ethan could still feel its eyes on him, the weight of its gaze heavy on his back. By the time he reached the edge of the creek, he could barely see. The moonlight barely pierced through the canopy above, leaving everything bathed in eerie shadows. The water was still, reflecting the dark sky like a mirror. Ethan knelt at the water's edge, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The whispers started again, low and unintelligible, as if the creek itself was alive with the voices of the dead. He leaned closer, trying to catch the whispers, but then something moved in the water. Ethan's heart raced as something long and thin slithered through the dark water, coming closer and closer until it surfaced, a pale, disfigured face, like the one from the figure earlier. But this time, it was in the water, its eyes wide and glowing. Ethan stumbled back, but his foot slipped on the muddy bank. He fell, splashing into the creek, the cold water rushing up to his chest. He gasped, scrambling to his feet, but the face in the water didn't move. It just stared at him. And then, something worse happened. The water started to churn. Ethan's stomach lurched. He tried to get back to the shore, but his feet were slipping in the muddy water. Something was pulling him under. A hand, cold and wet, gripped his leg, pulling him deeper into the creek. His heart pounded as he tried to kick it away, but the grip tightened, dragging him into the dark water. Panic surged through him, and he kicked harder, his hands thrashing against the surface. But the water was too strong. The last thing Ethan saw before everything went black was the figure, standing at the water's edge, still watching. When Ethan woke, he was lying on the ground, drenched but alive. The cold night air bit at his skin, and the first thing he noticed was how quiet everything had become. No whispers, no footsteps, just silence. He tried to sit up, his head spinning. He was lying in the mud at the edge of the creek, the dark water flowing peacefully, as if nothing had happened. But the memory of the cold hands gripping him, pulling him under, was all too real. His heart raced as he looked around. The campfire was still burning faintly in the distance, but his crew was nowhere to be seen. The figure, the man who had led him to the creek, was gone as well. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, still shaky from the ordeal. He was cold and disoriented, his body aching from the fall into the creek. His clothes clung to his skin, and his breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled toward the camp. When he reached the campfire, there was no one, just an empty, cold circle of stones. His crew's belongings were scattered around, but the men were gone. "Mike," Ethan called, his voice cracking. There was no answer. A sudden chill ran down his spine. His instincts screamed at him to get out of there, to leave the woods and never look back. But something else tugged at him, a need to find his crew, to understand what had happened. He wandered deeper into the forest, his steps slow, deliberate, as if something invisible was pushing him forward. The further he went, the more he felt it, the presence, the eyes watching him from the darkness. The trees creaked in the wind, and the air felt thick with something old, something ancient. As he moved, he noticed the trees were marked, strange symbols carved into the bark, almost as if someone, or something, had been marking the path for him. The symbols were too complex to be random. They looked deliberate, like a warning. Ethan's stomach turned. Something was very wrong here. He had to find his crew. Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder now, rushing through the trees like a storm. But this time, it wasn't just whispers. It was a voice he knew. Ethan, it was Mike. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. "Ethan, help us." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. The voice was calling from somewhere deep in the forest, just beyond his sight. Without thinking, he took off running, his breath ragged, his legs burning with every step. The voice grew louder, but it was no longer Mike's. Now, it was a chorus of voices, screams, pleas, and whispers all blending into one. Ethan reached a clearing, and there, standing at the center, was something he would never forget. In the clearing, the ground was unnaturally still, the air thick with an oppressive silence. The trees around the clearing had twisted into grotesque shapes, their bark warped and contorted as though they had been clawed at by some unseen force. The symbols etched into the trees were more intricate here, their designs pulsating, with an eerie glow that seemed to beckon Ethan deeper into the heart of the forest. And there, at the center of the clearing, was something that made Ethan's blood run cold. It was a large stone altar covered in moss and dirt, but unmistakably ancient. Its surface was slick with something black and oily, a substance that seemed to move of its own accord, twisting and writhing like it was alive. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer. The voices from the forest had stopped. All that remained was the low hum of the earth itself, vibrating beneath his feet. But then, a sound, a low, guttural growl, rumbled from the darkness, and Ethan froze. His eyes darted around the clearing, searching for the source. Slowly, the growl shifted, becoming something more human, more familiar. Ethan, this time, it wasn't just a voice in his mind. It was a physical presence, the words carried on the air, wrapping around him like a cold embrace. He turned, his eyes scanning the shadows. And there, emerging from the darkness, was Mike. Or at least, what used to be Mike. His body was twisted and contorted, his eyes wide and unblinking, a hollow, dark abyss where his pupils once were. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. Ethan, help! Mike's voice was a rasp, barely more than a whisper, but the pain in it was unmistakable. Ethan stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. Mike, his voice broke. What happened to you? Mike's body jerked unnaturally, and with a sickening crack, he twisted his head to face Ethan. His eyes locked onto Ethan's, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the darkness that filled Mike's eyes seemed to drain away, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Ethan saw his friend again, the man he had known, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same dark, empty gaze. The night was heavy with a damp mist that rolled in from the forest. The old logging road was barely wide enough for the truck, but Rick didn't mind. He'd been driving down these roads for years, hauling timber, day in and day out. But tonight felt different. His headlights carved a narrow path through the thick fog that clung to the trees. The tall pine trees seemed to close in on him, their branches reaching out like twisted hands. The world felt distant, muffled, as though even the night itself was holding its breath. Rick glanced at the clock on his dashboard. It was almost midnight. He had hours left before he'd be out of the woods. But something felt off. It was the silence. The forest had always been quiet at night, but this was something else. There was no sound at all. No animals, no wind, just the eerie hum of his truck's engine. The only thing Rick could hear was the faint thumping of his own heart. He had driven this route hundreds of times. But tonight the forest seemed alive. The trees seemed to shift in the shadows, their trunks bending toward the road, blocking his path. A creeping unease gnawed at him. He'd been warned about these woods. Locals called it the Whispering Pines. They said that anyone who drove through at night could hear whispers in the wind. But Rick, a seasoned trucker, had always dismissed it as superstition. Tonight, he wasn't so sure. The truck rumbled over a bump in the road, and Rick's eyes darted to the side. In the dim light, he thought he saw something, someone standing just outside the tree line. A figure, tall, thin, with long, unkempt hair. His heart skipped a beat. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. Nothing. No figure. No movement. The trees were just trees. Get a grip, Rick, he muttered to himself, his breath quick and shallow. He wasn't crazy. He was just tired. Long hours on the road were getting to him. Rick let out a shaky laugh and shifted the truck back into gear. He hit the gas, the tires biting into the gravel road. The mist swirled around him, thickening as he pushed deeper into the forest. The air was damp and cool, pressing against the windows like an oppressive weight. Then he heard it. A voice. It was so faint, he almost thought he imagined it. A whisper. No, more like a sigh. Like the wind itself was speaking. Rick's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He wasn't alone. His eyes darted to the side mirror again. This time, he thought he saw movement. Something in the mist, moving toward him. He couldn't make it out, but it was there. It wasn't just the fog. He could feel it. Something was coming for him. The engine sputtered. Not now, Rick muttered, trying to rev the truck back to life. He turned the key, but the engine just coughed and died. The air around him grew colder. The whispers came again, louder this time. Low and guttural, as if they were coming from the trees themselves. Rick's pulse raced. He wasn't imagining it. The voices were real. He jumped out of the truck, heart pounding, and stepped onto the gravel. His breath came out in white puffs as the cold night air bit at his skin. He didn't want to stay there, but he didn't know what else to do. The whispering grew louder. And then, as if on cue, he heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, shuffling, through the dirt and leaves behind him. Rick's blood froze. He spun around, his eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the mist and the trees, standing still, watching. The footsteps stopped. He held his breath, waiting, listening. The voice came again, only now it wasn't a whisper. It was clearer. Go back. Rick's heart slammed in his chest. He didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran back to the truck, throwing open the door and jumping in, slamming it shut. His hands shook as he tried to restart the engine, but the truck refused to turn over. The footsteps were behind him now, louder, closer. Rick's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. There, standing in the mist, was the figure. It was no longer distant. It was right there, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Tall, thin. Its face was pale, featureless, like a shadow wrapped in skin. Rick's breath caught in his throat as the figure moved, its head tilting unnaturally, like it was studying him. The truck sputtered and roared to life. Rick didn't wait. He slammed the gear shift into drive and floored the gas pedal. The truck shot forward, the wheels spinning as it kicked up gravel and dirt. The trees flashed by in a blur as he pushed the vehicle faster. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching him as he sped away. Rick didn't dare look back. He just kept his foot pressed to the gas, the truck roaring down the road. The mist seemed to thicken the further he went, the trees closing in on both sides like looming giants. His hands were sweaty, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The fog felt like it was alive, swirling around him, suffocating him. And the whispers. Oh, the whispers. They were growing louder. They echoed in his ears, relentless and guttural. Go back. Rick tried to shake the words out of his head. The last thing he needed was to go mad in the middle of nowhere. But the whispers were like a rope, pulling him towards something he couldn't see. Something dangerous. He had to get out of these woods. He had to get back to the highway. As he sped down the winding road, something flickered in the headlights. A figure. A woman. She stood just off the road, half hidden in the fog, staring at him with hollow eyes. Rick's stomach twisted. He tried to steer the truck around her, but the tires lost traction on the wet gravel. The truck slid sideways, and for a moment, he thought it would tip over. But then, just as quickly, the wheels gripped the road again, and the truck righted itself. Rick didn't dare take his foot off the pedal. The figure, if it had ever been there, was gone. Rick's eyes flew to the rearview mirror, expecting to see the woman chasing him. But the road behind was empty. Stay focused, he whispered to himself, trying to calm his racing mind. But then he heard it again, louder this time. A voice. A man's voice. Turn back. Rick's heart thudded in his chest. The voice was coming from the radio, but the static crackling in the speakers wasn't the usual dead air he had gotten used to. This was something else, something malevolent. He hit the button to turn it off, but the voice didn't stop. Turn back. Shut up, Rick yelled, slamming the button harder. The truck lurched. Rick's eyes snapped to the wheel. The steering was jerking violently, as if something was trying to take control of the truck. The mist outside seemed to press in even closer, the trees closing in like hungry mouths. The whispers were louder now, all around him, echoing in his mind. Rick tried to fight the pull, but the truck veered off the road, sliding toward the trees. He gripped the wheel with both hands, trying desperately to bring it back under control. But it was too late. The truck crashed into the thick underbrush, its front end slamming into a large tree. Rick's world spun. Rick's head throbbed. He was disoriented, but he forced his eyes open, staring through the windshield at the dense forest. He hadn't hit the tree head on, but it didn't matter. The truck was stuck. His breath came in ragged gasps as he checked his surroundings. The trees were so thick now, blocking out all light except for the faint glow of the moon overhead. The mist had swallowed the road entirely, and the air was colder than before. Rick could feel it on his skin, cold that didn't belong to this world. He quickly reached for his phone to call for help, but the screen was blank. No signal. Nothing. A soft thudding sound echoed through the trees. It was faint at first, but as Rick turned toward it, the noise grew louder. Footsteps. Rick's body went rigid. They were slow, deliberate, getting closer. He could hear them clearly now, heavy boots crunching against the gravel and dirt. He wasn't alone. Someone was out there. The footsteps stopped, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Rick didn't move. He held his breath, straining to hear any sound. But all that filled the air was that same whispering. He reached for the door handle, preparing to get out, but then he froze. A face appeared in the mist. It was pale, like a corpse, with dark, hollow eyes. The skin was stretched too tightly over the bones, and the lips were curled into a sinister grin. The figure stepped closer, and Rick could see the long, jagged fingernails scraping against the side of the truck, leaving long, deep scratches in the metal. Rick's heart skipped a beat. The figure leaned down to the window, and the air around Rick grew frigid. Its breath fogged up the glass. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Rick was paralyzed. Fear clamped down on his chest, squeezing out any attempt at movement. The creature, whatever it was waiting, watching him, just as it had done to countless others who had passed through these woods. "Go back," it whispered again. Rick's blood ran cold. He had to move. He had to get out of there. The figure's smile widened, stretching unnaturally. Suddenly, Rick snapped out of his paralysis. His hand flew to the gear shift, and he shoved the truck into reverse, slamming his foot onto the gas pedal. The truck lurched backward, but the figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching as the truck slid away. Rick didn't look back. He didn't dare. The truck bounced and groaned as Rick fought to steer it back onto the road. The forest seemed to close in again, but he pushed forward, not daring to slow down. The whispers had stopped for now, but the fear gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the image of that thing standing at the window. Its eyes locked on him. The engine sputtered, but it roared back to life. And Rick's hands gripped the wheel once more. He couldn't stop now. Not after everything. The road was still a twisting, unmarked mess, and Rick barely registered the turns. His mind only focused on getting out of the woods. The fog seemed to shift in unnatural patterns, and every time he glanced into the mist, he thought he saw shapes moving, people, or things, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. A figure materialized in front of him. Rick slammed on the brakes, hard in his throat. This time, the figure was a woman, standing tall in the middle of the road. Her long black hair whipped around in the wind, and her eyes were wide and unblinking, staring directly at him. He didn't have time to stop. Rick veered sharply to the right, tires screeching, and the truck skidded across the gravel. He fought to keep it under control, but the vehicle was sliding toward the trees again. Just before it slammed into the trunk of a pine, the truck jolted to a stop. For a moment, everything was still. Then he heard it. The whispers. But they weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices. Multiple voices, all calling out to him. Rick couldn't take it anymore. His pulse was racing, his breath shallow, and every nerve in his body screamed for him to leave. He stumbled out of the truck, dizzy, stumbling across the uneven ground. He had no idea which direction to go. But then he saw the lights. Faint at first, but then brighter. A vehicle. A truck, heading straight toward him. He staggered toward the road. But as the vehicle came closer, Rick's blood turned to ice. The headlights were empty. The truck had no driver. The whispers became screams. Rick turned and ran, not knowing where he was going, only knowing that he couldn't stop. The ground beneath him shifted and warped, and the trees seemed to close in, trapping him. The figure appeared again, just ahead, its hollow eyes gleaming in the dark. Rick froze. There was nowhere to go. And then the whispers stopped. Everything stopped. Rick stood alone in the forest. The trees, the fog, the voices, all of it was gone. Only darkness remained. The next morning, the authorities found Rick's truck abandoned on the side of the road. His phone was gone. His belongings were left behind. No one ever found him. But the locals knew. The whispers never stopped. They still called to anyone who drove through the whispering pines at night. And they said, on quiet evenings, when the fog was thick enough to swallow the world whole, you could still hear Rick's voice, telling people to turn back,